The night everyone laughed at the poor waiter. They thought they were watching harmless entertainment. No one realized they were actually witnessing the moment that would destroy an engagement, expose the true character of one wealthy family, and change one quiet woman's life forever. Because the person they chose to humiliate wasn't as powerless as they believed. And before the night ended, someone they never expected would stand up, speak the truth, and leave the entire ballroom in complete silence. The Calloway estate was known for hosting the city's most elegant gatherings. Politicians, business owners, celebrities, and influential families filled its grand halls almost every weekend. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above polished marble floors, while a live orchestra filled the air with soft music. Every detail reflected wealth, prestige, and perfection. Behind that flawless image, however, dozens of staff members worked tirelessly to keep everything running. Among them was Elena Carter. Most guests never noticed her. She wasn't there to be admired. She quietly carried trays, refilled glasses, and made sure every guest had exactly what they needed before they even asked. She had been working at the estate for nearly 3 years. During that time, she earned the respect of every employee because she never complained, never argued, and never treated anyone with disrespect. Few people knew the truth about her life. Years earlier, Elena had dreamed of becoming a professional pianist. She had studied for years, believing music would become her future. But when her mother became seriously ill, everything changed. Medical bills replaced piano lessons. Hospital visits replaced concerts. Dreams were quietly packed away so responsibilities could come first. Without hesitation, Elena accepted whatever work she could find. Serving guests wasn't the life she had imagined, but it allowed her family to survive. And to her, that mattered far more than personal success. She never spoke about those sacrifices. She believed dignity didn't require an audience. It simply required doing the right thing even when no one was watching. That quiet strength was exactly what made her different from everyone else in the room. Unfortunately, it was also the reason someone believed she would never fight back. Across the ballroom stood Vivian Harper. Tonight was supposed to be the happiest evening of her life. It was her engagement celebration with Damon Calloway, the eldest son of the family that owned the estate. Every camera in the room seemed to follow her. Every conversation somehow returned to her. She smiled for every photograph, accepted every compliment, and enjoyed every second being the center of attention. To most guests, she appeared elegant, sophisticated, perfect. But the employees knew another version of Vivian, a version hidden behind expensive dresses and polished smiles. She often criticized waiters over tiny mistakes. She spoke to housekeepers as if they were invisible. She believed kindness was something reserved only for people with influence. Tonight, that side of her would become impossible to hide. As dinner service began, Elena carefully carried a silver tray filled with crystal glasses across the ballroom. She moved slowly through the crowd, making sure nothing spilled despite the hundreds of guests surrounding her. Then she heard a voice. "Ladies and gentlemen." Vivian tapped her glass with a small silver spoon. The music stopped. Every conversation faded. More than 100 guests turned toward her with curious smiles. Vivian glanced across the room until her eyes settled on Elena. Then she smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the kind of smile that usually came right before someone was about to be embarrassed. Elena felt a quiet knot form in her stomach. She had no idea that the next few minutes would change every life inside that ballroom. As Vivian slowly raised the microphone, Elena realized every guest in the room was now looking directly at her, and whatever Vivian was about to say would be remembered long after the celebration was over. Vivian's smile grew wider as she slowly stepped toward the center of the ballroom. She lifted her champagne glass, waiting until every conversation came to a complete stop. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said cheerfully, "before we continue celebrating, I'd like to have a little fun." Soft laughter echoed through the room. Most guests expected a harmless engagement game, No one realized someone was about to become the target of public humiliation. Vivian slowly scanned the ballroom before pointing toward Elena. You... Every eye immediately turned. Elena froze. For a brief second, she wondered if perhaps Vivian needed assistance. Instead, Vivian smiled even brighter. Would you come over here, please? The request sounded polite, but something about her tone made the room feel unusually uncomfortable. Elena carefully placed the serving tray onto a nearby table before walking toward the center of the ballroom. She kept her posture calm, her hands steady. Years of working with difficult guests had taught her one valuable lesson: never let anyone see your discomfort. When she stopped a few feet away, Vivian looked her up and down as though examining an object instead of a person. What was your name again? Elena. Right, Elena. Vivian nodded dramatically before turning back toward the audience. I've been watching her all evening. Several guests smiled politely. Vivian continued, she's probably the quietest employee here. More laughter followed. Elena remained silent. She had no idea where the conversation was going. Then Vivian spoke again. I've always wondered something. She folded her arms. Tell everyone. What does it feel like serving people whose shoes probably cost more than your monthly salary? The ballroom suddenly became silent. A few guests looked away. Others exchanged uncomfortable glances. The joke wasn't funny anymore. It felt cruel. Elena took a slow breath. She could have responded with anger. She could have defended herself. Instead, she answered with quiet dignity. My job is to serve every guest with respect, and I'm proud of the work I do. For a moment, no one spoke. Several employees quietly lowered their heads. They knew Elena. She worked harder than almost anyone else inside the estate. But Vivian wasn't finished. Oh, don't be so serious, she laughed. I'm only trying to make everyone smile. She picked up a folded napkin from a nearby table. Actually, I have a little challenge for you. A waiter standing nearby looked visibly nervous. Even Damon, who had been speaking with several business partners across the room, glanced toward the growing crowd. Something about Vivian's expression caught his attention. She handed the napkin to Elena. I want you to stand right here. Pretend you're welcoming guests to your own mansion. A few people forced awkward smiles. Others looked embarrassed. Elena understood exactly what Vivian was doing. She wasn't inviting her into the celebration. She was turning her into entertainment. For the first time that evening, Elena considered walking away. But she also knew something important. Sometimes the strongest response was refusing to give cruel people the reaction they wanted. She gently placed the napkin back onto the table. Then she looked directly at Vivian. Her voice remained calm. I'm sorry. I'm here to do my job, not perform for an audience. A quiet murmur spread across the ballroom. Vivian's smile disappeared for the first time. She hadn't expected Elena to answer with such calm confidence. Before she could respond, a deep voice suddenly came from the back of the room. I think she's absolutely right. Every head turned toward the entrance. The room fell completely silent, because the person walking toward them was the one guest Vivian never wanted involved. The moment Damon stepped forward, no one knew whose side he would take, but before the night was over, one simple decision would expose the true character of everyone in the room. The ballroom remained completely silent as Damon Calloway walked toward the center of the room. No one dared to speak. Not the guests, not the musicians, not even the staff. His calm expression revealed nothing, making it impossible for anyone to guess what he was thinking. Vivian forced a confident smile. Damon, she said brightly, we were just having a little fun. Damon's eyes briefly met hers before shifting toward Elena. He noticed the untouched tray resting on the nearby table. He noticed the uncomfortable silence. And he noticed something else. The sadness Elena was trying so hard to hide. What happened? He asked quietly. Before Elena could answer, Vivian stepped forward. Oh, it's nothing serious, she laughed. I invited her to join a harmless game. but I think she took it a little too personally. A few guests nodded awkwardly, unwilling to become involved. Damon looked around the ballroom. Is that what everyone saw? No one answered. The silence itself became an answer. Elena lowered her eyes. She didn't want an argument. She didn't want sympathy. She simply wanted the evening to end. I'm sorry if I caused any trouble, she said softly. I'll return to work. She turned to leave. Elena. Damon's voice stopped her instantly. She looked back. You don't owe anyone an apology. Those simple words echoed through the ballroom. Several employees quietly exchanged surprised glances. It was the first time anyone from the Calloway family had publicly defended a member of the staff. Vivian let out a nervous laugh. Oh, come on, Damon. You're making this sound much worse than it really was. I was only trying to entertain our guests. Damon remained calm. Humiliating someone isn't entertainment. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Every word carried enough weight to silence the entire room. Vivian folded her arms. You're overreacting. Am I? Damon asked. Then he turned toward Elena. Would you tell me exactly what happened? Elena hesitated. She didn't want anyone to lose their job because of her. She believed kindness meant walking away whenever possible. Before she could speak, one of the senior housekeepers quietly stepped forward. I'll tell you. The woman had worked at the estate for nearly 20 years. She was respected by every employee. With surprising courage, she described everything. How Vivian had called Elena into the middle of the ballroom, how she mocked her salary, how she asked her to perform in front of the guest, and how Elena had remained respectful through it all. When she finished, the room became even quieter than before. Damon looked directly at Vivian. Is any part of that untrue? Vivian's confidence began to fade. It was supposed to be a joke. A joke? Damon repeated. He slowly looked around the ballroom. I don't see anyone laughing. Several guests immediately looked away. Some appeared embarrassed. Others seemed ashamed that they had stood there without saying a single word. For the first time that evening, Vivian realized the crowd was no longer on her side. But Damon wasn't finished. He turned back toward Elena. His voice became noticeably gentler. I've heard wonderful things about your work. The staff speaks highly of you. My parents have praised your professionalism more than once. He paused. And after what I've seen tonight, I understand why. Elena felt tears gathering in her eyes. Not because she had been humiliated, but because someone had finally treated her with the respect she had always given others. She quietly whispered, Thank you. Damon gave her a small nod. Then his expression hardened once again as he faced Vivian. What happens next isn't just about tonight. It's about the kind of people we choose to become. Vivian's heartbeat quickened. For the first time, she wasn't worried about the guests. She was worried about what Damon was about to say next. Because within the next few moments, one decision would end an engagement that everyone believed was unbreakable. Vivian stared at Damon, hoping he would calm down after a few moments. Instead, he took one slow step toward her. I've spent the last 10 minutes watching something I never thought I'd see inside this house, Damon said. His voice remained calm, but every word felt heavier than the last. Our family built this estate on one simple principle. He glanced around the ballroom. Every person who walks through these doors deserves respect. It doesn't matter if they're a guest, a chef, a gardener, or someone serving dinner. Several employees lowered their eyes. For years, they had worked quietly without expecting anyone to defend them. Tonight was different. Vivian forced another smile. You're making this far more dramatic than it really is. No, Damon replied. You did that the moment you decided another human being was your entertainment. A quiet murmur spread across the room. Some guests shifted uncomfortably. Others slowly placed their glasses on nearby tables. The celebration no longer felt like an engagement party. It felt like everyone was witnessing a truth that had been hidden for far too long. Vivian folded her arms. She wasn't hurt. I never touched her. Damon looked at her for several seconds before answering. Humiliation doesn't always leave bruises. Sometimes it leaves scars people carry for years. The ballroom became completely silent. Even the musicians stood frozen. Elena looked down at the floor. She wasn't used to people speaking on her behalf, especially not someone like Damon. Vivian laughed nervously. So now I'm the villain? No, Damon answered. You became that the moment you stopped seeing Elena as a person. Those words landed harder than anyone expected. Several guests quietly nodded. Others remembered moments earlier that evening, the forced smiles, the awkward laughter, the uncomfortable silence. Deep down, many of them had known it was wrong. They simply hadn't spoken. Damon slowly turned toward the guests. I want to ask all of you something. If the person standing here was your mother, your daughter, or your sister, would any of you still call this a joke? Not a single hand moved. Not a single voice answered. The silence said everything. Vivian's confidence finally began to disappear. She realized she was standing alone. Then Damon looked back at Elena. I'm truly sorry. No employee should ever be treated this way. Elena blinked, trying to hold back her tears. You don't have to apologize, she whispered softly. I've learned that some people only judge what they can see. Damon nodded, and that's exactly why they miss the most valuable people in the room. For a brief moment, everyone looked at Elena differently, not as a waitress, not as someone carrying trays, but as a woman who had shown more grace than anyone else at the party. Vivian suddenly raised her voice. So what now? Are you seriously choosing an employee over your fiancé? The question echoed across the ballroom. Every guest waited for Damon's answer. No one moved. No one even breathed. Damon looked directly into Vivian's eyes. His expression was calm, but there was no hesitation left. I've made my decision. Vivian felt her heart sink, because she already knew whatever Damon was about to say next would change both of their lives forever. Damon took a slow breath, and the next sentence that left his mouth would end more than just an argument. It would end a future that everyone in that ballroom believed was already written. The silence inside the ballroom became almost unbearable. Every guest waited. Every employee held their breath. Vivian searched Damon's face, hoping she would find even the smallest sign that he was bluffing. She found none. Damon finally spoke. I can't marry someone who believes another person's dignity is worth less than her own pride. The words landed like thunder. Several guests gasped. Someone quietly dropped a glass. Vivian stared at him in disbelief. What did you just say? Damon didn't raise his voice. I said, our engagement is over. The room fell into complete silence. For a few seconds, no one moved. No one even seemed to breathe. Vivian laughed nervously. This isn't funny. You can't be serious. I am, Damon answered without hesitation. I've spent months trying to convince myself that your behavior would change. I told myself you were under pressure. I told myself people sometimes make mistakes. But tonight, you didn't make a mistake. You revealed who you truly are. Vivian's eyes quickly filled with anger. So you're ending everything. For her? She pointed directly at Elena. Damon slowly shook his head. No, I'm ending this because of you. You chose cruelty when kindness would have cost you nothing. Those words echoed through the ballroom. Several guests quietly nodded. Some looked embarrassed that they had applauded Vivian only an hour earlier. Others suddenly realized they had ignored behavior that should have been challenged long ago. Vivian looked around the room, hoping someone would defend her. No one did. The silence was louder than any argument. Then Damon turned toward the employees. I owe every one of you an apology. You come here every day. You work long hours. You help this family protect its reputation. And tonight, we failed to protect yours. Several staff members lowered their heads, visibly emotional. For years, they had accepted disrespect as part of the job. Hearing someone finally acknowledge their worth meant more than they could explain. Elena felt tears slowly roll down her cheeks. She quickly wiped them away. She had never expected anyone to stand beside her, especially not in front of an entire ballroom. Damon walked toward her. "I'm sorry this happened under my family's roof." Elena smiled gently. "You don't need to apologize for someone else's choices." Damon looked at her for a moment. Then he smiled. "Maybe not, but I can choose what happens next." Before anyone could ask what he meant, the large entrance doors quietly opened. An older gentleman entered the ballroom. His silver hair and calm presence immediately caught everyone's attention. The conversation stopped once again. Several longtime employees straightened their posture because everyone recognized him immediately. Richard Calloway, the founder of the Calloway estate, and the one person whose opinion carried more weight than anyone else's. He slowly looked around the silent ballroom. Then his eyes settled on Damon, before finally resting on Elena. His expression grew serious. It was obvious. He already knew something terrible had happened. Richard took one slow step forward, unaware that the next few minutes would uncover a truth about Elena that no one in that ballroom had ever imagined. Richard Calloway slowly walked into the center of the ballroom. His calm expression immediately commanded everyone's attention. No one dared to speak. Even the orchestra remained silent. He looked around the room, noticing the uncomfortable faces of the guests, the emotional staff members, and finally Damon standing beside Elena. "What happened here?" Richard asked quietly. No one answered. Vivian quickly stepped forward. "Richard, this is all just a misunderstanding. We were celebrating and somehow everything got completely out of control." Richard didn't respond. Instead, he turned toward Damon. "I'd like to hear your side." Damon calmly explained everything. He described how Elena had been publicly humiliated, how she had been mocked because of her job, and how she had remained respectful despite everything. Richard listened without interrupting. When Damon finished, Richard slowly looked at Elena. "Is that true?" Elena hesitated for a moment. She never enjoyed speaking badly about anyone. Finally, she nodded. "I never wanted to cause problems. I only wanted to finish my work." Richard closed his eyes for a brief second. When he opened them again, there was visible disappointment on his face. He turned toward Vivian. "My father taught me something many years ago. He said, you can judge the character of a family by the way they treat the people who serve them." He paused. "Tonight, you failed that test." Vivian's face turned pale. "I didn't mean for this to happen. It was only a joke." Richard slowly shook his head. The sentence, "it was only a joke," has become the favorite excuse of people who refuse to accept responsibility. The ballroom became completely silent. Several guests lowered their eyes. Richard then looked back at Elena. "There is something I should have done a long time ago." Elena looked confused. Richard smiled gently. "I've watched you work in this house for nearly 3 years. I've seen you stay late without being asked. I've seen you help new employees. I've seen you treat every guest with kindness, even those who didn't deserve it." He took another step closer. "But there is something most people here don't know." The room grew quiet once again. Richard reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. He carefully removed an old envelope. Its edges were slightly worn with age. "I've been carrying this for almost 2 years." Every guest stared at the envelope. Richard continued. "Your mother came to see me. She told me about your dream, about the piano, and about everything you sacrificed to care for your family." Elena's eyes filled with tears. She had never told anyone at the estate about that part of her life. Richard handed her the envelope. "I promised her that when the right moment came, I would help you continue the dream you gave up. With trembling hands, Elena slowly opened it. Inside was a full scholarship to one of the country's most respected music academies, along with every expense already paid. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. She looked at Richard in complete disbelief. I don't know what to say. Richard smiled warmly. You don't owe me thanks. You earned this long before tonight. Tears rolled down Elena's face, not because of the humiliation, but because someone had quietly believed in her, even when she had stopped believing in herself. Across the ballroom, many guests felt ashamed. For the first time, they realized they had spent the evening judging a waitress, without knowing the remarkable woman standing behind the uniform. Vivian remained frozen, watching everything she had worked so hard to build slowly fall apart. As Elena held the envelope close to her heart, no one realized that Richard had one final announcement to make, one that would change Elena's future forever and leave Vivian with nothing but regret. The ballroom remained silent as Elena carefully held the envelope against her chest. She still couldn't believe what had just happened. Only minutes earlier, she had been standing in the middle of the room, treated like she didn't matter. Now, the very people who had ignored her were looking at her with admiration. Richard slowly faced the guests. I hope every person here remembers tonight. His voice was calm, yet every word carried undeniable authority. Not because an engagement ended, but because we were reminded that a person's value can never be measured by their uniform, their salary, or the position they hold. He paused and looked around the ballroom. Character is revealed by how we treat those who have nothing to offer us in return. Several guests quietly lowered their heads. Some looked genuinely ashamed. Others realized they had laughed when they should have spoken. Richard turned toward Elena once more. I have one final request. Elena looked at him with surprise. I hope you'll accept that scholarship. The world deserves to hear your music. And I hope you'll never again believe your dreams are too small because someone else failed to see your worth. Unable to hold back her emotions any longer, Elena nodded. I accept. Her voice was barely above a whisper. But more than that, thank you for reminding me that kindness still exists. Richard smiled warmly. No, Elena, you reminded all of us. The room slowly filled with applause. It started with one employee, then another. Within seconds, the entire ballroom was standing. Not because Elena had become wealthy, not because she had suddenly become important, but because they finally understood the quiet strength she had carried all along. Across the room, Vivian stood completely alone. The cameras that had once been pointed at her in admiration were now capturing something entirely different. The consequences of arrogance. She looked toward Damon one last time. I'm sorry. The words came quietly. For the first time that evening, they sounded sincere. Damon looked at her with sadness rather than anger. I hope you truly are, because one apology can never erase the way someone felt, but it can become the first step toward becoming a better person. Vivian lowered her eyes. She knew there was nothing left to say. Without another word, she quietly walked out of the ballroom. No one tried to stop her. Months later, Elena graduated from one of the country's finest music academies. Her first public performance sold out within days. As she sat at the grand piano beneath the bright stage lights, she noticed two familiar faces sitting in the front row, Richard and Damon. When the final note echoed through the theater, the audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation. Elena closed her eyes for a brief moment. She wasn't thinking about the applause. She wasn't thinking about success. She was remembering the young woman who once believed her dream had ended while carrying serving trays through a crowded ballroom. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone who had discovered a truth far more valuable than fame. Sometimes, the people who are treated as if they matter the least become the ones who inspire everyone else the most. because dignity can never be taken away by humiliation. It only grows stronger when someone chooses kindness over cruelty. And in the end, the richest person in the room wasn't the one wearing the most expensive clothes. It was the one who never lost her humanity.